The purpose of this podcast is to educate our listeners, and it does not constitute professional advice or services. The legal areas, services, law and process discussed are relevant at the time of recording, and it is important that you seek independent legal advice on such topics to ensure that the law has not changed or been updated in relation to the area of law you need advice on or are interested in.
Court is in session.
Welcome back to Lawyers Who Lunch. Today we are putting me in a hot seat again and are going to be talking about cohabitation.
Yeah, so we're talking about cohabitation due to the recent developments in the law surrounding cohabitation and the fact that many couples don't get married anymore, and it's becoming a lot more common for couples to cohabitate.
Yeah, they are. Yeah, people aren't married.
So just for the audience,
Yeah.
what exactly is cohabitation and why is it such an important legal issue?
So cohabitation is where you basically live together, potentially as like husband and wife. So you might be in a long-term relationship, you own a house together, you're living together, but you're not actually married, you haven't got into a civil partnership. And as you said, it's becoming increasingly common that people are living this way rather than getting married. I can't remember the second part of your question.
Why is it such an important legal issue?
Because of the new development that is coming out now. So for many years, cohabiting couples have very little or less rights, should I say, than married couples. However, the government have just released a new framework that they're now discussing about giving cohabiting couples more rights than what they had previously, because they aren't getting married, but potentially like long-term relationships like a marriage, but don't get the same protection as a married couple.
Yeah, so and a very generic term for those kind of couples is common law spouse, and I think everyone's probably heard of common law spouse, but it's not actually a legal term.
No, it's not a legal term, and common law marriage isn't actually a legal thing. So that's a historical context that came about to describe people that are living together as cohabiting couples. But we've actually tracked this morning, it was actually abolished in 1753. But I think the other thing that people see it for is you might not notice it so much because you wouldn't be looking for it, but it's still a thing on like insurance documents. So like if you say when you're doing your car insurance, it asks you, are you in a cohabiting couple or common law marriage? So people still recognise it, and it's a phrase I suppose used to describe it. It just actually isn't the correct legal term.
No. So under the current law then, under the current law surrounding cohabitation, if an unmarried couple separates, what rights do they actually have? Very
little. If I was completely honest, probably the most right that they might have will be over a property, and depending on how they own that property. There is a new case that also came about, and I can't remember the name for it for the life of me, that did give a long-term relationship. So what had happened in that, there was a older couple that had been together for quite some time, got engaged, and then he passed away 2 days later, and they tried to say that she wasn't allowed to claim his pension, however was obviously really reliant on that because they were going to be getting married and doing all the right things. So the law did allow her in that instance to claim on the pension, and she was allowed to keep it. So the law kind of started to modernise in that sense and recognise cohabiting couples, but other than that, very little.
Yeah, if you break up, you break up.
You break up, yeah. Absolutely.
So how does it differ between married couples, civil partners and cohabitating partners?
So married couples and civil partners on divorce, I'm going to say divorce generically, I know civil partners kind of dissolve the marriage rather than say that they have different factors, because what we would look at is the Section 25 factors when they get divorced. The sharing principle applies to married couples and how we divide the assets there, and that's across all the assets, not just specifically applying to one asset. Whereas to answer the question, cohabiting couples, they don't have any rights realistically. The only time that might come up is, like I said, the property is most likely the asset that is going to give rise to something like that, because you could be a joint tenant. So a joint tenant is someone when two people own a property, both a legal and equitable interest together, but the difference is on the death of that person, it would automatically go to the surviving joint tenant, whereas if you own it in tenants in common, you can own the property in different shares. So say one of you made a large contribution, that could be to the deposit or the property actual purchase, you can have that recorded and reflected. So it might be that you own the property in 70-30 split, or it could be you can still own it 50-50 actually, people do that, but what happens then is it will divide via a will rather than automatically going to that surviving joint tenant. So that is going to be your biggest major asset that you look at. But typically for cohabiting couples, what tends to happen in the rise is it might be, say that one party owns the house and has done, but during that time the other parties then contributed to the mortgage, or they've paid for renovation works, or made actually like a substantial, and it's got to be a substantial contribution to the property to increase the value of it. It might be that they actually have an interest in that property, but then we're looking at trusts and going down a different route. It's not an automatic right that you get.
Yeah, so it can be quite difficult just to say, I paid the mortgage, I should be able to get...
Yeah, you need to evidence it as well.
Yeah.
You paid the mortgage, how are you proving, have you got the receipts for the renovation project that you paid for? Have you got like a little agreement on paper that you would say, yes, I did this and I'll do this, to that effect?
Yeah. And then, so if a cohabiting couple would have to do that, can they get an order then to say, that can order like the sale of the property, or like how does that work then?
So you can go to court over it, so it's different. So it wouldn't go through the family court, it tends to go through the civil courts, because you do it under Talata rather than the Matrimonial Causes Act. So yeah, they can go to court for an order for sale, and it comes under like the civil proceedings rather than the family proceedings. So yeah, it is a possibility. Hopefully though, I would like to believe that, you know, because you can still go to mediation, like divorced couples can, and you can still try and negotiate and reach an agreement amicably without it. I would strongly recommend that you do, because it's just cheaper than going to court, but they can if they need to.
Yeah, so there's plenty of options for
them.
There
is plenty of options, and they've still got, I suppose they've got a protection in that essence that they can rely upon it, but it's just not the same as married couples.
Yeah. This is a bit of a random question, but it's something that probably would come up for a lot of couples, is what legal protection is there for stay-at-home parents who aren't married and they split up?
What, like, whether they can keep the house kind of thing, or...?
So they're obviously reliant on the other partner's income and everything, but if they split up then...
Not a lot, realistically, is the honest answer to that, because you're not together. You're going to you might have to put yourself on the housing register. Let's say again you've contributed to that, you're not on the property, but you have contributed to the mortgage, or you've contributed to renovation costs. It might be that you can establish that you do have an interest in the property, and you might be able to put a homes right notice on there. Your best bet is probably to apply for child maintenance, to be honest, if you need some form of financial support, because that is where you're going to go. Especially if did you see your partner, the example you gave was they're earning a lot more than you. Yeah. And, you know, again, that's going to depend on how many nights the child is also with, because I suppose that's probably a podcast episode for a whole other day, to be honest. It will depend on how many nights that person then has with them. So again, not a lot of protection. There is protection, but not a lot that happens. Like, sadly, you're not married, you're just going to have to split and go your separate ways.
Yeah. And then kind of zoning in on the whole children and finances area then, so does having children together change your legal position at all?
No.
Just simply
no. Not under the current law anyway.
No. So what happens with pension, savings and jointly owned property when there's sort of children involved and they have that claim together?
Okay, so I talked about that case earlier. Pensions are becoming more recognised, and that you might have a claim on them, particularly if you've been together for a long time. So that case kind of led a path for that potentially being a new claim, but that is going to be that. I think those, like I said, I think they were together 10 years. It was a long relationship. That's not going to be someone that's been together a couple of years. You're probably not going to be able to make a claim on that. Savings and investments, I said if you've got a joint account, you're probably likely to divide that equally. I imagine savings are going to, your own personal savings will stay your own. Joint account, typically you tend to divide and share that out, because it's your joint savings. Again, I suppose that depends on how much one's contributed to the other. It might be that all the savings have come off one party, and you might like to argue that they shouldn't be entitled to it. I'm just giving you examples of what does arise. Joint property, typically, if it's owned jointly, it's divided, either one party can buy the other party out for their share in the property, or it's sold and you split the equity equally.
Yeah, which is pretty similar to it in a divorce, isn't it?
Yeah, very similar to divorce. It's just they don't have all the additional protections, and they don't get to claim on all these additional assets that you would. And when you think of a divorce, you get to claim on a business, investments, savings, shares, the house. additional property. You've like the whole pot then, the whole marital pot is up for grabs, I suppose, whereas in cohabitating couples it's probably realistically it's probably just the house that you're gonna be looking at.
So how are debts dealt with if an unmarried couple separates?
Again, it's going to depend who owns their debt. So if you can set up debt together, like you can get joint credit cards, you can get joint loans, you're jointly responsible for those. So you would be jointly responsible for discharging that debt. If you've got debt of your own, you're responsible for that, and the same as your partner would be. If he's got debt of his own, he would be responsible for that. That said though, there are circumstances where people have taken debt out in the other person's name, or they're not aware that that debt has been taken out, but that again is an issue of like proving that and you not being known, which is actually really hard to do.
So would you say that when it's a cohabiting couple, it tends to be under the civil clause, and it's a civil claim more than it is a family claim?
Yeah, absolutely.
Which is obviously a whole different thing than
It's a whole
itself.
different thing in itself, yeah.
So in terms of when a partner dies, and in terms of inheritance and stuff, what happens if one partner dies without leaving a will?
So if a person hasn't got a will, they pass away known as what is intestate. So what then happens, the intestacy rules will come into effect, and you have to go through the list basically that they apply for it. The first one, I believe, off the top of my head, is actually, it would tend to typically go to your spouse. Then it goes to children, then it goes to family members, and there's a strict order. I think then it might go to like step siblings, family members, all the way down to if no one steps forward to claim the crown gets it, then it goes straight back into the crown. And that's a lot of the crown's wealth actually, is that it's been given to them through death because people haven't done their will. So if you are a cohabiting couple and know that you do have this asset together, I would strongly recommend that you probably get a cohabitation agreement in place so that you know what's going to happen. And at least if you know that you want your share to go to your surviving partner, it could be that you've got children together, you know, that you want them to remain living in that property until your child reaches a certain age or something like that. You get a will written. Like, it's really important, because otherwise your estate is quite possibly going to pass in a way that you don't want it to.
Yeah, and you could be like kicked out of your house.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a real risk, and it could end up like a whole load of issues for you. Well, one, if you don't have a will, you're going to have to apply to get letters of administration for someone to deal with your estate. They then are going to apply the intestacy rules. It will be for your partner then to like argue that he should have an interest in your property, which just creates more money then, because they're going to have to get a solicitor there, they're going to have to argue, and it might actually end up in court for them to determine who should have this part of your estate, basically. And it's
just for the sake of just having a will.
Yeah, absolutely. Just put it in writing.
Yeah,
100%.
So kind of to summarise, can a surviving cohabiting partner inherit automatically?
No. At the moment.
Yeah. So in terms of at the moment, so looking at the recent legal developments, the government has recently launched a consultation on giving more legal protection to cohabiting couples. So what changes are being proposed?
So obviously I've written this down so that I could answer this question for you. So there's that new consultation coming out that's seeking to introduce this new framework for cohabiting couples. It's kind of been a few years in the making, to be honest, because as we've said, and I think we're probably quite repeatedly said this throughout the episode, that cohabiting couples are becoming more of a thing rather than people getting married, because whilst the divorce rates are going down, people aren't getting married like they were, so you know there's no surprise that the divorce rates are going down, and it's been something petitioned for quite some time because people are staying together as cohabiting couples. So this is why the government are kind of consulting now on this new framework that's coming out. So to answer your question though, what they are currently looking at is anyone has to be over 18 to bring a claim. There's going to be a possible 2-year limit to be able to bring a claim in relation to like assets and division and that sort of stuff. If that 2-year limit passes, you probably won't succeed.
So you have to claim within 2 years
within
of
2 years of separating. Yeah, absolutely. And it is going to kind of adopt the needs approach of they're considering it adopting that needs approach of marital assets, but that what they have kind of emphasised is that any new rights are going to remain distinct to those from divorce and won't seek to replicate marriage, because it is a different relationship. What they're looking at currently is whether putting eligibility criterion for couples, so people who will be able to claim then on this will be couples who have lived together for a minimum of 3 years or more, and whether they actually live together and share a child. But they're then going to look at property, savings, investments and pensions. But there was a strict criteria also that's being considered of they've kind of looked at having to prove the existence of a cohabitation couple, because I suppose at least with a divorce you've got a marriage certificate, because that's what they ask for, don't they? They ask for your marriage certificate, they ask for evidence that you were married, and that, how do you I think you asked me earlier, didn't you, how do you prove you're in a relationship? Great question.
You have to do like your text messages, photos together, like
yeah, absolutely. Like, so what they've said is that they want to know that there's an existence of a joint household, stability of the relationship. I don't know how you're going to prove that one. What financial arrangements do you actually have together? The responsibility for children. Is there a presence of a sexual relationship? Public recognition of the relationship. So I suppose it might be a Facebook official and that sort of. Do people know that you're in a relationship? And then it just says other, but it doesn't specify what that might be. So as we said, that this is all being consulted on at the moment. So that this could all change. Things might, but this is what they're currently kind of looking at.
Yeah.
And what could come our way, basically.
So these are obviously very big proposals and it's going to change the law in a lot of ways. But how do you think it will change family law specifically?
I don't think it's going to change family law specifically, because it will probably still go under the civil rules as it was, because they're not. Oh, that said, I don't know. They might make an act under the Family Law Act. It'll probably still be dealt with under the civil, because currently cohabitating couples we deal with talata.
Yeah.
And I imagine it's going to stay that way. It's not very clear, I have to say, on the government proposal I read this morning which route they're looking at going down. I suppose it might change family law in that cohabiting couples actually are going to have rights now and a framework for us to work to help and support them. I mean, we live in a new era now where people aren't getting married and people don't, families aren't the same, so couples aren't staying together, mum and dads aren't staying together, so it's just giving that extra protection, I think, to people who are living these long-term relationships. I suppose it probably is a long-term. It's us recognising that wider. I think when we spoke with David last week about the law needs to keep up with changes and modernisation, and I think this is what the government are trying to do. Do I agree that? Personally, I'm not sure 3 years is. I think that's too soon. I think that's like too small of a time. I think personally, I'd like to see like 5 years plus. But I think that's just a personal preference. I just think 3 years is still quite short.
Still quite new,
Yeah, still quite a fresh relationship. You're probably still in like your honeymooning period a bit then. So, don't know where I sit with it. But I'm glad to see that there is change coming and recognising this new way of life.
Yeah. So you mentioned earlier about a cohabitation agreement. So what is that?
So that would basically kind of probably like a separation agreement, probably like a clean break order kind of thing, but it's an agreement that sets out what your cohabiting roles is. So say for instance you do buy this property, say one of you have put in a larger lump sum than the other, you can reflect that in that agreement to say, look, this is what's going to happen when we separate. Because I've put in 70% of the property, you will only retain 30%. So it kind of gives a it's document then, I suppose, that will define how you're going to live together in a cohabiting and how you might divide your assets when you then separate.
And do you think every cohabiting couple should have one? Do you advise?
I suppose it's not necessary, potentially. Not many people do. They're not that common, if I'm completely honest. I find that they're become more common when you separate, because a load of issues then arise. Definitely worth considering, or at least going to get legal advice on, if you're thinking about moving in together and cohabitating, that you know what your rights are and what could happen if you separate. I think it's going to be more for people who've got substantial assets potentially, that they might be bringing into the relationship and that partner's going to benefit from, and how you're going to, say you go in and buy a car, like who's going to, say like you go and buy a nice 60 grand Land Rover Defender, who's keeping that then after?
Yeah.
How's that? Are we selling it? Are we keeping it? Most people would be expected to keep their cars, but if you were the one that's bought it, you're probably going to be the one that wants to keep it. So it's just working out those little issues
Yeah.
in that.
So is it more recommended then, I suppose, that you seek legal advice before moving in together or when problems arise?
Before. Absolutely, before. At least you know what you are. And I suppose it's one of those things, I suppose it's a bit like a prenup and a postnup, isn't it, realistically? I get why people don't, because you're in a relationship, you want to be able to trust that person.
You don't want to assume.
You don't want to assume. You don't want to. You're not looking for the worst point of your life. You're not looking for that breaking up. Actually, this is the next step. It's exciting. You're moving in together. It should be fun. It should be exciting. You don't want us to come and be like, no. Realistically, so I do get why people don't. But it's definitely worth knowing. Particularly when this new law comes in, it'll be worth knowing what your rights are.
Yeah.
But when that's going to be introduced, there was no actual time frame of that either. It's just being consulted on.
Yeah.
So who knows? Well, Keir Starmer resigned today, Ben told us, so that could put a spanner in the works of when this is going to be
definitely
introduced officially.
Yeah.
It's going to be, obviously, but when, I don't know.
Could be years.
Yeah.
We're going to play a little game now of true or false myth busting. So true or false, living together for 7 years make you common law husband and wife?
False.
If my name isn't on the deeds, I have no rights?
False.
Having children means I automatically get half the assets?
False.
A will is more important than people think if you're unmarried?
True.
There we go. A little summary of...
Yeah. What was it, the second question?
If my name isn't on the deeds, I have no rights?
Yeah. So that is when I was going back to, if you've contributed substantially to the mortgage or paid for renovations or helped increase the value of the property in some way or another, it might be that you can establish that you actually do have a financial interest in the property. Just because one is owned by a certain person, that doesn't mean to say that you may not be able to establish an interest in that property.
Yeah. So if every unmarried couple listening today could do just 3 things to protect themselves legally, what would they be?
Consider going to check what your legal rights are on separation or entering in a relationship together, so you know what that is. Definitely consider getting a will if you want your assets to, especially if you're a child together as well, because you might want to appoint a guardian within your will if you know that you're going to want your asset to go. It might be, say, again, let's give this scenario, you're with your partner, you're cohabitating, you know you're never going to get married, and that's fine, people don't, but you know that you want your husband to keep that asset. You may want to have that recorded in your will. You might want to appoint a guardian for your child within that will, because heaven forbid you were both, in the same car accident and you both went. And then a third one, and consider getting a cohabitation agreement.
So that's the end of my questions. It was a very interesting chat.
Yeah, absolutely. It'll be interesting to see what the world holds for cohabiting couples going forward.
Yeah, it's obviously definitely changing.
Definitely changing. The world is keeping up, which is what we need.
Yeah, bring us back into the 21st century.
100%.
Yeah. Thank you for listening.
Thank you for listening to Lawyers Who Lunch. Don't forget to follow us on social media on Facebook, Instagram and TikTok. If you have any topics you would like us to discuss or any other questions, don't forget to email in at lawyerswholunch@outlook.com.